Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll be taking up is related to India-Canada relations, as both countries have expelled the diplomats of each other. The second article is related to nuclear power, as a write-up has appeared in the newspaper regarding the adoption of nuclear power in India. Additionally, we will be taking up 5 articles in the simplified, where we will be also discussing some prelims pointers. Now, the first article is related to India-Canada relations. The context behind it is that Canada alleged that India is involved in the killing of the Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. India denied these allegations, but Canada went ahead and expelled 6 Indian diplomats. In return, India also, in a tit-for-tat move, expelled 6 Canadian diplomats, including the High Commissioner. So the relations between India and Canada have touched a new low. So we will be discussing the background of India-Canada relations, the significance, and a few suggestions. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Policies and Politics of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. Now, first let's discuss the background of the relations between India and Canada. The two countries did not enjoy very good relations initially, as in 1948, Canada gave a call for plebiscite in Kashmir, which was against the interests of India. Subsequently, when India conducted the Operation Smiling Buddha, that is, we conducted the nuclear tests in 1974, again Canada opposed it and even recalled its High Commissioner. Again, when India requested for the extradition of Talvinder Singh Parmar, who was wanted in India for the killing of police officials in Punjab, it was declined by the Canadian Prime Minister. The Canadian Prime Minister of the time was Justin Trudeau's father. At the same time, the Indian forces conducted the Operation Blue Star, in which the Indian forces entered the Golden Temple and flushed out the Sikh separatists. In that operation itself, the Sikh leader Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala was killed. In retaliation, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her 2 Sikh bodyguards. This led to a chain of events. It led to the anti-Sikh riots, and in retaliation, there was also a bombing of an Air India flight. In 1985, the Air India flight 182 was bombed by the Sikh separatist groups, which led to the killing of more than 300 people. Now, in this case, the Canadian police even arrested a person, Ripudaman Singh Malik, in 2000, but he was acquitted in 2005 of this bombing case. But in 2022, Malik was shot dead, and in 2023, last year, Hardeep Singh Nijjar was also shot dead. And the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged that India is involved in this killing, and there is the hand of the agents of the Indian government in the assassination of Nijjar. But meanwhile, in 2015, the relations between India and Canada were also elevated to a strategic partnership. Now, what is the current scenario of the relations between the two countries? Justin Trudeau is seen to be close to the sympathizers to the Khalistani separatists. He is proximate to the Sikh separatist leaders who ask for the independent state of Khalistan. And he is even alleged to be inciting extremists, which was observed by the Indian side during the case of the farmers' protests. There is a political angle also which is involved here, because Justin Trudeau entered into an alliance with the New Democratic Party, and this New Democratic Party is seen to be openly supporting the referendum for Khalistan on the Canadian soil, and therefore it is against the interests of India. Now, what is the significance of India-Canada relations? One, the strategy of Canada for the Indo-Pacific, it observes that India is a critical partner for Canada. And it observes that China is the disruptive global power Therefore, the two countries need to collaborate, need to cooperate in the Indo-Pacific region. In terms of trade, India is the 10th largest partner of Canada, and also there are talks for CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, going on between the two countries, although it has not been signed yet. Also, the Canadian pension funds have investments in India in the stocks and other companies, etc. Plus, there is cooperation in the energy sector. As in 2010, the Nuclear Cooperation Agreement was also signed between the two countries. And in terms of science and technology, again, various memorandums of understanding have been signed between ISRO and the Canadian Space Agency. Also, the Antariksh, that is the commercial arm of ISRO, launches various Canadian satellites, etc. Therefore, there is cooperation in the space sector as well, which helps India in earning forex reserves. In terms of diaspora, the students from the Indian origin, they constitute the largest group in terms of international students studying in Canada. 4% of the population of Canada comes from India. Even there are quite a few MPs in the Canadian Parliament who are from the Indian origin. That is, about 22 MPs in the Canadian Parliament currently are from India. Likewise, the Indian immigrant population in Canada is observed to be about 9 lakh. There are even Canadian companies operating in India, which are more than 600. And in terms of the exports from India to Canada, the maximum imports are in the field of engineering goods and then drugs and pharma, etc. Now, what are the challenges in the relations between the two countries? One, the Canadian Parliamentary Committee came up with a report recently. It observed that China is the single biggest foreign threat for Canada, but India was termed as the second biggest foreign threat for Canada. The report even alleged that there is an interference by India in the democratic processes and institutions in Canada, which is not true. It even alleged the Indian involvement in the influencing of politicians, ethno-cultural communities, etc., that is essentially trying to interfere in the Canadian democratic processes. There is the issue of Khalistani separatism, because Canada has to balance the assertions of the Sikhs in Canada and its relations with India, because it is even observed that the Trudeau's support base in Canada seems to be on decline as per some experts, and therefore he tries to keep the Sikh separatist leaders on his side. There have been attacks on the Indian consulates in Canada, on the Indian diaspora as well in Canada. Regarding trade also, there are some concerns, as Canada resorts to some protectionist measures as well as imposition of some complex labor laws to reduce the immigration from India. Even the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement has not been signed yet, and the talks remain in limbo. The relations of Canada with China remain a cause of concern for India, although Canada itself terms China as the single largest foreign threat for Canada. Now, what are some suggestions to improve the relations between India and Canada? One, we need to engage with the Sikh diaspora in Canada. We need to counter the misinformation which is spread by the Sikh separatist leaders. We can also dehyphenate the two issues, the Khalistan issue and the signing of free trade agreement or the ensuring of free trade between the two countries, because the free trade agreement will ensure better economic cooperation, improvement in trade ties between the two countries. We can also resort to track 2 diplomacy, that is not only government to government diplomacy, but we can also engage the civil society and the diaspora as well in the improvement of relations between the two countries. Now, there is a practice means question also. Discuss the significance of India-Canada relations in the context of the present geopolitical dynamics and economic cooperation. Analyze the key challenges faced in this bilateral relationship and suggest measures to enhance collaboration. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to nuclear power. The context behind it is that a write-up has appeared in the newspaper regarding the nuclear power adoption and its challenges in India. So we'll be discussing the nuclear power program of India and the challenges associated with it. This is important in GS3 under the topic energy. Now, why do we need nuclear energy? Because India needs energy security. India meets most of its oil and gas needs through imports. To reduce this import dependence for energy security, India wanted to utilize the nuclear power. Globally also, the nuclear energy is the second largest source of low carbon electricity. The largest source of low carbon electricity is hydropower. When we look at the context of India, India is the 7th in the world in terms of the number of reactors, that is, we have 22 nuclear reactors. We even want to increase the share of nuclear energy in the total energy production in India from 3.2% to 5% by 2031. Also, the nuclear energy is a clean source of energy. The greenhouse gas emissions from the nuclear power production, they are about 5 grams per kilowatt hour. This is more than 100 times less than the greenhouse gas emissions which are emitted through the energy production through coal. Plus, it is perennially available, whereas the energy coming from the renewable energy sources like solar power, wind power, they are available intermittently, but nuclear energy is perennially available. Now, when we look at the nuclear energy output in India, it has been continuously increasing in the past decade. We can observe from the graph also. But when we look at the global nuclear electricity generation, it has been declining since the 90s. That is, its share in terms of the share of nuclear energy as a percentage of the total energy produced, that has been declining globally since the 90s. Let's also look at the resources available in India that promote the usage of nuclear power. We have huge thorium reserves. About 25% of the world's thorium deposits are in India. Majorly they are in Kerala, in Chavara, in Andhra Pradesh, in Chhatarpur in Odisha, and also in Ranchi Plateau in Jharkhand. We also have uranium deposits as well, as can be observed from the map. They are available in Wakhin in Meghalaya, Jadugoda, Nawapad, Singhbhum, Lambapur and Tumlapalle in Kadapa Basin, Gogi in Bhima Basin, and in the Rohil in the Delhi Fold Belt as well. These can be asked in prelims. Now, how is nuclear power generated? In a nuclear power plant, let's understand that also. In a nuclear power plant, the fission reaction is usually triggered in the nuclear reactor core using the fissile materials. And this fission reaction is controlled through the control rods. That is, if it is allowed to continue uncontrolled, the temperature rise will be too much and the nuclear reactor will melt down. The control rods reduce the temperature and control the fission reaction. Thus, heat is generated in the reactor. This heat is used to convert water into steam. This steam is used to drive turbines and electric generators, which finally generate electricity. Therefore, in a nuclear power reactor also, the nuclear fission reaction is ultimately producing heat, which ultimately produces steam and drives turbines and drives generators to produce electricity. Now, India has vast reserves of thorium, which is a fertile material. It is not a fissile material. Therefore, we conceptualized a three-stage nuclear program. To understand this, we have to understand what are fissile materials and what are fertile materials. The fissile materials are those on which if we do a bombardment of low energy neutrons, it will trigger a fission reaction. For example, uranium 233, uranium 238 or plutonium 239, they are fissile materials. Whereas thorium is a fertile material. The fertile materials are those which are not directly fissionable, but they can be converted into fissile materials by the irradiating of neutrons upon them. For example, thorium-232, etc. To utilize these fertile materials, India came up with the three-stage nuclear program. In this three-stage nuclear program, the first stage uses the pressurized heavy water reactor. Why heavy water reactor? Because the light water reactor needs enriched uranium, whereas in the heavy water reactor, the natural uranium can also be used. Plus, we had a good design for the pressurized heavy water reactor, therefore it was a wise decision of that time. Now, in this pressurized heavy water reactor, the input is natural uranium and it produces some electricity. Along with this, it produces the depleted uranium as well as some plutonium. These products are then inputs for the second stage. This second stage is the plutonium fueled fast breeder reactor. It produces plutonium and some uranium-233 as well as some electricity. Why do we call it the fast breeder reactor? Because it produces more plutonium than it consumes. In this stage also some thorium is utilized. Then in the third stage, the uranium-233, which is the byproduct of the second stage, is utilized as an input along with thorium. These two combined generate electricity as well as generate uranium-233, which is again used as an input as well for the third stage. Thus, it forms a complete cycle where we will become self-sufficient and self-reliant and utilize only thorium to generate electricity, as the second stage and the third stage, they will itself generate enough uranium-233 for it to be used in the third stage. Now, what are the challenges behind the adoption of this nuclear energy in India? The nuclear energy production produces the nuclear waste. The half-life of the nuclear waste is quite high, and at the same time there are no long-term storage options of this nuclear waste, and it emits radiations which are harmful to health also. At the same time, there are safety concerns. For example, we have already observed the incidents of Chernobyl and also Fukushima Daiichi in Japan. Therefore, there are safety concerns. Plus, we need fissile material. The availability of fissile material in India is poor. Therefore, we have to be dependent upon imports from other countries. But at the same time, we are not signatories to NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and also we are not members of NSG, the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Although in 2009 we got a waiver, and subsequently we have been signing bilateral cooperation agreements for the nuclear cooperation. Also, India enacted the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act. Under this act, the production companies who produce the nuclear reactors, they are also held liable for the damage which is caused in case there is a disaster. Therefore, the foreign investors, the foreign producers, they are not willing to invest and build reactors in India. Plus, there are concerns related to land acquisition. Usually, people are not willing to give away their land for the building of a nuclear reactor. For example, as was observed in the form of the Kudankulam protests by people. The initial capital which is required for the building of the nuclear reactor is also quite high, which leads to cost overruns. For example, what happened in South Carolina, the reactor plan was itself dropped because of the huge cost overruns in the project. There are cheap alternatives which are again available. For example, the solar energy, the wind energy, they cost rupees 3 to 4 per unit of the electricity production. Whereas as per the Department of Atomic Energy estimates itself, the cost of production in Jaitapur, Mithivardi, etc., it is around 10 rupees per unit. Therefore, the nuclear energy production is costly. At the same time, the global trend has been of denuclearization of some time, and there are risks, for example, cancer risk, because of the high levels of radiation, as was observed by some studies also. Now, let's also look at some operational nuclear power plants in India. There are nuclear power plants operational in Uttar Pradesh at Narora, in Gujarat at Kakrapar, in Maharashtra at Tarapur, in Karnataka at Kaiga, and in Tamil Nadu at Kudankulam. Now, what can be some suggestions regarding nuclear power in India? One, we can look at the cheaper alternatives. For example, we can increase the proportion of solar and wind energy as they will be available for a long time and they are getting cheaper by the day. Or we can explore the fusion technology. The fission technology which is used in the nuclear power plants right now, it is producing a lot of nuclear waste also, whereas the waste generation from the fusion technology will be lesser. And we can ensure that the safety measures are adopted to ensure that the disasters are averted and the awareness generation is spread so that the misinformation which is prevalent among the people regarding the safety concerns of the nuclear power plants, that is avoided. Now, there is a means practice question also. Evaluate the potential of nuclear power as a sustainable energy source for India in addressing its energy needs. Discuss the challenges associated with the development and expansion of nuclear power in the country. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to MSP. This is important in GS3 under the topic issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies and minimum support prices. Now, what is MSP? The minimum support price, it is a form of market intervention. It is like price insurance. That is, a minimum return is guaranteed to the farmers, to the producers by the government. That at this price, we will be definitely procuring your crop. Now, the article describes that the MSP has been announced by the government for 6 Rabi crops. It is announced by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs on the recommendations of CACP. It describes the MSP for wheat and gram in particular. Regarding wheat, Uttar Pradesh is the largest producer of wheat, followed by Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, Bihar, Gujarat and Maharashtra. The Government of India requires about 1.8 million tons of wheat monthly for its obligations under the National Food Security Act for the PDS, Public Distribution System. And regarding gram, the largest producer of gram is Maharashtra, followed by Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. Gram is the biggest pulse crop in India in terms of the sown area. Now, let's also analyze the concept of MSP. What is the importance of MSP? One, it is needed to counter the price volatility. The prices of crops vary every year, and in the terms of prices of crops, we can observe a cobweb phenomenon. The cobweb phenomenon means that if there is too much supply of a particular crop this year, then the prices will fall sharply. And then the farmers will be discouraged from sowing that crop in the subsequent year. And in the subsequent year, there will be too less supply of that crop and the prices will again increase. Therefore, there is a lack of information symmetry in terms of the net sown area of a crop and its prices. There is lack of market integration which leads to the price volatility, which can be countered through MSP, which guarantees the minimum price at which the government will procure the crop. It is important for ensuring food security because the government procures the crops through MSP and then it is used to fill the buffer stocks and that is liquidated through the PDS, the public distribution system, also ensuring the food security. It ensures a protection against the global shocks because globally sometimes there is less production of certain food crops. Then if we have some buffer stocks, some reserves built up, then it will ensure that we are protected from the global shocks. Plus the MSP also helps in controlling the food inflation and limiting the role of the middlemen. Plus it is positively correlated to the rural wages, as some studies have pointed out that higher MSPs also ensure that the poverty in the rural areas also declines and the income or the wages in the rural areas usually improves. But there are certain challenges of implementing MSP. One, there are challenges related to equity. As per Shanta Kumar committee, about 6% of the farmers only are able to take the benefit of MSP, that is the rich and large farmers. Plus, there is less awareness also. About 10% of the farmers only know the approximate MSP before sowing that crop. Likewise, it leads to a distorting of the crop pattern also. It has made the cropping pattern in India cereal centric, as the MSPs are effectively implemented for the cereals, and this in turn triggers the inflation in the pulses and oil seeds, as most of the people go for the production sowing of the cereals. It leads to a negative environmental impact also. For example, the sowing of the water guzzling crops like rice leads to too much extraction of groundwater, because there is MSP guaranteed for such water guzzling crops, and they are even exported also, which in turn leads to even the export of water from India. Plus, there is international pressure due to the MSP, as it is argued that it is part of the ember box subsidy under the WTO provisions. Plus, there are divergence also. As per the NSSO survey, about 46% of the food grains which are procured through MSP, they are diverted. The open procurement policy of the government, that is, the government procures whatever amount of crops is brought to the market at the guaranteed minimum support price, leads to surplus procurement. This surplus procurement leads to wastages also and pilferages. On top of that, certain states even resort to bonus pricing. Over and above the MSP, they are offering more prices to the farmers. This leads to a huge subsidy bill. The burden comes on the public exchequer. Niti Aayog has also observed that there are certain challenges related to the procurement centers. For example, the procurement centers, they are distant. They are not near to the villages, they are far away from the villages, and there is transportation cost involved, and certain procurement centers even insist on the revenue records that it is coming from this state or this district only, and at times they lack the storage facilities and they are stored in the open, which leads to their damage and wastage. Now, what can be some ideas to improve the situation? Niti Aayog had suggested that we can go for price deficiency payments. That is, rather than the government procuring the crop, we can even encourage the private players to procure the crop. And if the private players are procuring the crop at a price which is less than the minimum support price, then that deficiency in price, that difference in price, can be paid directly to the farmers. A similar idea is the Bhavantar Bhugtan Yojana, and the Niti Aayog even suggested that we can fix a floor price which is based on a 3-year average. And regarding the procurement centers, they should be located at the village level, and the MSP should be announced well in advance. The Swaminathan committee also recommended that the MSP should be at least 50% over the cost of production, so that the farmers also get some remuneration and they also derive some benefits, economic benefits from the production of crops. The economic survey even suggested that the MSP policy can be tailored as per the social returns. For example, what social returns? The pulses, they have a positive externality. They lead to the improvement of soil fertility, they lead to the nitrogen fixation in soil, they lead to lesser water consumption from the groundwater. Therefore, the social returns from the pulses production will be higher. Therefore, the MSP for pulses can be increased. The public investments and other non-price interventions can also be explored. This can be done by increasing the investment in the research and development in agriculture, essentially by trying to bring the cost of production down. Because if the cost of production is brought down and the investments are done more in the R&D rather than the price subsidies, they will be more efficient. We can rationalize the MSP for the pulses and oil seeds as well. Now, the next article is related to North Korea and South Korea tensions. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Policies and Politics of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. First, let's look at the background of the relations between the two countries. They both were a single country earlier, and they were even under the Japanese control when Japan invaded Korea in 1910, but Japan was defeated in the World War II. And once the World War II ended, there was a split between the North Korea and South Korea. The North Korea was allied to the USSR, that is Russia, and later on to China, and the South Korea was allied to the USA. They were bifurcated through the Yalta Conference. This happened in 1945 and the two countries were bifurcated. Ever since then, they have been engaged in an ideological Cold War because the South Korea is usually influenced by USA and the North Korea by USSR and China. The two countries even fought a war from 1950 to 1953. The North Korea invaded into South Korea in 1950, and in this 3-year war there was no clear winner. Ultimately an armistice was signed and then both countries joined the UN in 1991. And after this armistice, the two countries were divided through the 38th parallel and a demilitarized zone was also established between the two countries. But the North Korea had nuclear ambitions. To control the rise of the nuclear ambitions of North Korea, an agreed framework was signed between North Korea and USA from 1994 to 2002. But the North Korea exited from the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003, and consequently a 6-party talks were also held between North Korea and South Korea, and it also included USA, Russia, China as well as Japan. This 6-party talks also broke down in 2009 and North Korea had been conducted nuclear tests ever since 2006 when it conducted the first nuclear test. Now the two countries are divided through the 38th parallel and there is a demilitarized zone which separates the two countries. This war has been ongoing for more than 70 years. Now, the North Korea had been pursuing the development of nuclear weapons and inviting heavy sanctions from the United Nations Security Council, although negotiations have been ongoing for achieving a peaceful reunification between North Korea and South Korea, with agreements even being signed in 2000, 2007 and 2018. But now again they are on the back burner. Now what is the genesis of the current tensions? The current tensions go back to the meeting between the US President of the time, Donald Trump, and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Both leaders met in Vietnam, but these talks failed. There was not even a joint statement after that. And after this meeting, the North Korea even restarted its nuclear program. Now they view South Korea as their primary foe and the invariable principal enemy. They have fortified the southern border and they have been even sending helium balloons who are carrying trash across the southern border. That is, they are targeting South Korea at every opportunity. Now, can there be a war right now? Some thinkers suggest that the North Korea's increasing closeness to Russia and China has meant that it is not afraid of the deterrence which is presented by South Korea's alliance with US. Therefore, it is not afraid of USA also because of its close alliance with Russia and China. Now it is observed that North Korea is exploiting these military confrontations to strengthen its own internal cohesion. It is uniting its own people. Whenever tensions rise, North Korea emphasizes upon the external threats to boost loyalty to the regime in North Korea. But this situation is a global threat. How? Because the North Korea has been resorting to military developments. Now they are even claiming to be in possession of intercontinental range ballistic missiles. They often lead to provocations. For example, they resort to shelling on the South Korean islands. And the US support to South, this might even lead to a situation of confrontation between the two countries. Often also the cyber attacks across the world, they are traced to the origin of North Korea. Now the next article is related to electronics manufacturing. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, etc. Before coming to the article, let's understand why do we need to boost domestic electronics manufacturing. One, we need to ensure sovereignty in the technology sector also. We don't want to be in a situation like Malakand dilemma. Malakand dilemma is used in the context of China, that China is dependent upon the oil imports which are done through the Straits of Malacca, and if the Straits of Malacca are choked, then the energy security of China may be compromised. Likewise, we don't want to be dependent upon imports for technology. If the other countries refuse from exporting technology to India, we may be left impaired. Therefore, we want to be sovereign in technology sector also. Plus, it will help us in achieving the net zero emission targets, because the electronics manufacturing will ensure the production of EVs, solar panels, etc. in India, and India will become resilient to the global supply chain shocks. The supply chain shocks can happen due to trade wars, for example, US-China trade war, or pandemics like COVID-19 pandemic. Plus, we want to develop the advanced technology in India also. We want to be leaders in the sector and ensure the development of sectors like artificial intelligence, the supercomputing, quantum computing, Internet of Things, etc. Plus, it will help us in ensuring that we can build up our forex reserves. We can export the electronics items from India if they are manufactured in India and thus earn forex reserves. It is also important for ensuring national security. Now, coming to the article explains that Prime Minister Modi has announced that there is a $500 billion target for the electronics manufacturing in India by 2030. This seems quite high because India's entire manufacturing output in 2023 was just $660 billion. But still, we can achieve this. But for this, we have to be ensuring the formation of clusters for the utilization of economy of scale in the electronics manufacturing, and also much of this export growth has to be export led growth. And from the history of manufacturing also, we can observe that the clusters have usually succeeded. For example, the Silicon Valley, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and the more recently Shenzhen in China. Likewise, there are some clusters upcoming in India also, like Sri Perumbudur in Tamil Nadu and Noida in Uttar Pradesh. They have been growing. Now, what are the reasons behind this success? There are three factors which are needed for the success. One, we need to leverage the economy of scale. Ensure that the size of the clusters are large. For example, as is observed in Shenzhen, a Chinese special region, alone exports about $350 billion worth of electronics products, and it is about 2000 square kilometers in area. Whereas the largest Indian electronic cluster under the electronics manufacturing cluster scheme of India is just 2.5 square kilometers. Why do we need large size? Because it helps in ensuring that the buyers and the suppliers, they are located at the same place and there is competitiveness in the ecosystem itself. For example, the Foxconn factory in Sri Perumbudur, it has 21,000 workers, and the large zones, they also help in ensuring that the workers' houses, they are also at the same place. Plus, we need to ensure that there are customized regulations for the export of the electronics products and the devolution of powers. The devolution of powers right down to the industrial clusters itself. For example, the requisite powers to the EMC authority can ensure that the necessary approvals and the permissions can be got quickly. For this, we can even explore having the differentially regulated zones. For example, we already have such zones in Gift City, where for financial services there are differentially regulated zones. We can do the same for electronics manufacturing also. Now, since there are extremely specialized supply chains in the electronics manufacturing industry, therefore we need to put in place pro-employment labor laws first thing, and we need to ensure that there are tax and tariff exceptions, because they have been allowed earlier also for the oil and gas industry to grow. Now, the electronics manufacturing industry is also a strategic one. We can also put in place similar exceptions for the tax and tariffs. The corporate tax and GST rates also can be benchmarked against those in Vietnam and China to ensure that the global players are not going there, rather coming to India. Now, the next article is related to disaster insurance. This is important in GS3 under the topic environment. The article also talks about the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda for disaster risk reduction. Let's discuss that as well. It says that all development sectors must imbibe the principles of disaster risk management. And it talks about risk coverage. The risk coverage for disaster risk reduction must include all poor households, SMEs, national and multinational corporations, nation states, etc. It talks about the women's leadership and greater involvement of women for the disaster risk management. It talks about the investment in risk mapping globally to improve the global understanding of the nature and disaster risk. It talks about the leveraging of technology to enhance the efficiency of disaster risk management efforts and the development of a network of universities to work on the disaster related issues. The utilization of opportunities provided by social media and mobile technologies for the risk reduction, building of local capacity and initiative to enhance disaster risk reduction, and making use of every opportunity to learn from disasters and achieve that. There must be studies. It talks about the bringing about of greater cohesion in the international response to disasters. Now, the article suggests that the second point of agenda, which is talking about risk coverage, also needs to be completed through the disaster risk insurance. Now, this risk coverage has two connotations. One is the physical safety from disasters through early warning systems, and the second is the hope of receiving optimum compensation of losses. Now it is difficult for the state to compensate entirely for the loss which may be caused by a disaster. Therefore, a risk insurance comes into picture. The article is suggesting that we can explore a parametric insurance. Parametric insurance means that the payout from the insurance company will be based upon certain parameters. These parameters will be defined in advance, that if these conditions are met, then there will be a payment from the insurance company. For example, if this much amount of rainfall happens or this much is the wind speed, etc., then there will be a payout. Therefore, a physical damage assessment needs not to be done. It can lead to quicker responses and quicker payments because certain parameters are met and there is immediate payment, and there are little disputes in the claim settlements from the insurance companies. This has been explored already in India by Nagaland, for example. It put in place a parametric insurance for extreme rainfall in 2021. Likewise, in Kerala, the Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation covers the dairy farmers for heat stress. This is in contrast to the indemnity-based insurance. This is another method. In indemnity-based insurance, a physical assessment is needed to verify the losses. It takes time and it delays the payments, and sometimes there are disputes also. Therefore, we can resort to the parametric insurance. Likewise, if the disaster risks are not insured, they can lead to security issues also, as is observed in the article. It says that there were about 3 million refugees that came out of Afghanistan when USSR invaded Afghanistan. They were housed in tents in Pakistan along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border and fed by the UNHCR. But the presence of radical preachers led to the birth of young Taliban, which later captured power in Kabul itself. So the disasters, they need not be natural, they can be man-made also. Now, the next article is related to access to justice. This is important in GS2 under the topic governance. Now, the article suggests that to ensure access to justice, we can explore the idea of third-party litigation funding. What is third-party litigation funding? It means that a third party, that is an investor, can come forward and invest in the legal battle between two parties in the court. But in return, he will be getting some commission. Whatever compensation is awarded by the court, he will be taking a certain percentage of it. How it is important? For example, if there is a shopkeeper who is waging a battle against an e-commerce giant, this will be like a David Goliath scenario. Likewise, if there is a tribal villager fighting a case against a polluting industrial giant. Again, this will be like a David and Goliath scenario. In such scenarios, a third party can come and fund the legal battles. Now, this has been allowed by the Supreme Court in Bar Council of India versus A.K. Balaji judgment. Here, the court has observed that we can go ahead and allow the third party litigation funding. It can serve as a potential equalizer in the courtroom, ensuring that the litigating parties, they are at an equitable platform. But the court cautioned that in such cases, it should not be lawyers who are bankrolling such cases, and rather it should be third parties. But there are certain concerns regarding the third party litigation funding. For example, what if the investors start cherry picking those causes which are profitable in nature, but leave behind the social causes which are actually needed? Likewise, what will be the say of the third party in the case strategy? If an investor is funding a legal battle, he will want a say in the case strategy, how the case should be fought. And India lacks a comprehensive national framework regarding the third party litigation funding, etc. Now, regarding the regulatory framework also, there are certain issues. These third party litigation funders, should they be provided as a license in the form of financial service providers? Or should there be a dedicated oversight body? Plus, there might be concerns that are they having adequate capital to fight that legal battle? There can be capital adequacy norms which need to be put in place. For example, in Hong Kong, there is a code of practice for third party funding in arbitration. It mandates the disclosure of financing details, information on adverse costs, liability for costs, and the extent of the funder control. How much control will the third party litigation funder have? And what will be the level of court in the involvement in these cases? There are certain other initiatives also regarding the improvement of access to justice in India. For example, there is the Disha scheme, that is designing innovative solutions for holistic access to justice in India. It has three main components: the Telelaw initiative, Nyay Bandhu, and the legal awareness program. The Telelaw and Nyay Bandhu have been fusioned under the Telelaw 2.0. The Telelaw is for reaching the unreached. It is to provide the legal consultation through video conferencing, through telephone, etc. to the marginalized sections who are unable to afford the private legal practitioners. The Nyay Bandhu is to provide free legal services, that is pro bono legal services to the people who are not able to afford them. And through the Nyay Mitra and the legal awareness programs, the legal awareness is spread among the common populace. Thank you.